Let's see. Here we go.
Ah, Scream.
Hey guys, what's your favorite scary movie? All right, we're gonna throw this up right now just so no one yells out any spoilers. But
hello, Ian.
Hi. Oh, no. So we're here. Welcome tonight. It's we're talking about Scream 6, the latest and certainly not the last. I would imagine in this. It is all about family, just like everything nowadays. Fast and the Furious, the Mandalorian, which we just talked about. But yeah, I'm joined once again by a lovely and talented group of folks here to talk about some slasher movies, or at least one. Oh, David, that's a glamour shot. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We have David Fowley. Again, my voice is cracking. I need to drink some more here. I wasn't even old enough to get into Scream 6. I know nothing of what I'm talking about. David Fowley of Keeping It Real. Ghost the Face Man Krawczyk. DC show, not at Shazam. Oh, that's right, Mark. You warmed my heart. You skipped out on Shazam, going to see Shazam tonight. And to talk Scream 6 with us. Thank you. And then Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. Thanks, guys, for joining. Now, David and I, we reviewed Scream 5 last year. I think just the two of us. And I was
I knew he was going to go there.
Nice.
Somebody was going to do it.
I was totally done with. I was honestly done with Scream after Scream 3. I think Scream 4 had a really great kind of opening conceit where it was like it felt like 10 minutes of false openings, just like fake trailers and fake outs. And as much as I like Emma Roberts, I was just like, what? There's nothing to this. And Scream 5, I thought, was another one of those soft reboot requel films that took place in Woodsboro. We're back at Woodsboro again, and there's another Ghostface Killer. And who is it? Oh my God, there's two of them. What a twist! Again, we got spoilers up for anyone who hasn't watched Scream 5 or 6. Why are you listening to this? Seriously, we talked about Scream 5, but now we're in New York. Scream 6 takes place in Manhattan. Well, no, right. We're in Illinois right now and Wisconsin, respectively, Mark. But it's I don't know if it's the change of scenery. I don't know what happened. It's the same creative team behind both of these films, but with a few exceptions, and they are pretty big and bad exceptions, I thoroughly enjoyed Scream 6. I went in kind of with my fingers, my arms crossed. And I was like, what is this? What's this nonsense going to be? But yeah, it got me. Aside from, and this may sound like a big problem, and it kind of was, didn't care for the killers. Yes, there's more than one.
Do you ever?
Yes, there's more than two. I mean, the first one, that was a lot of fun. The second one was kind of interesting. The third one, yikes. Yeah, they just kind of get lamer and lamer as they go along. And this one, yeah, I didn't care for. I like the fact that there were three of them. But to me, it was everything leading up to the big reveal was the fun part. I love how this movie opens. I thought it was a crime, though, that... I mean, from the moment I saw her on screen, I knew she was going to be the Drew Barrymore of this movie. I'm like, no, put her in the main cast. Samara Weaving. How do you kill Samara Weaving in the first 5 minutes?
Right?
Yeah,
that's probably the only reason why she signed up.
Well, also because it was the Ready or Not filmmakers, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just got that history there. But okay, Mark. Well, you gave us the synopsis for The Mandalorian. Jeff, it's been a while since you've synopsized, I think.
I don't think I have yet, other than maybe
virgin synopsis.
Well, long story short, I think you said it. It's a new setting. We're in New York, and Tara is the one who survived the Drew Barrymore scene in the first one, played by the hot as a pistol Jenna Ortega, is a student at in New York. What?
Oh yeah, she is.
No, I mean, I'd say she's arguably the most. Well, what I mean as a she's the hot commodity.
A performer.
Her star.
I think she's very attractive,
sure.
but I think she's this year's it girl, if you will. By nature of Wednesday and even X and some other stuff she's done. She was very funny at the SAGs with Emily.
Oh yeah. I want to see those two.
Emily the Criminal, dare I say, Miss Aubrey Plaza. Anyway, she's in college trying to get beyond what had happened to her in Scream 5. Her sister is not over it. Sam has tagged along, followed her to New York, where in addition to the two of them being in New York, the other two survivors from the previous film, the twins, are also in school, which is a little convenient. But they all are in New York, and it starts off with a film professor who sort of fills in the sort of trope of talking about scary movies with her blind date, who she's going to meet in a bar, played by Ms. Weaving. And then it turns out that, of course, she's going to be victim number one, and there is a Ghostface Killer. But in the first of many fairly good surprises, I thought, in this one, maybe that's why you liked it more than previously versions in. The Ghostface Killer is revealed, but the Ghostface Killer has then killed himself. And then we find out that he and his roommate were going to do these things to see what it was really like to kill somebody, and almost kind of a Leopold and Loeb or Alfred Hitchcock's Rope kind of conceit. But they quickly get rid of that because there's another Ghostface Killer who's taking care of the one who's stuffed into the fridge in all kinds of parts in this college wannabe's roommate refrigerator. And then he in turn is killed too. Eventually we find out that it seems to be that even though they've left their hometown, it follows them to this new location, and the two girls and their friends are all in danger, and shenanigans after that ensue. Lots of good uses of New York, which I think freshens things up and adds some twists to it. And we have to kind of figure out who's after them, why they're after them. And again, I think because, they've kept those characters from before and they're fairly new. It's not like Neve Campbell, and Courtney Cox shows up, of course, but not as big as she used to be. There's sort of a new take on it, and they're kind of bonded. We want the sisters to survive. Gives us somebody to root for here. And they're not stupid. They're pretty smart throughout, and they're pretty ballsy throughout too. I think they're not, the typical kind of people who step into traps and mistakes all the time. But those are, I think, a couple of the things that kept it fresh and surprising, and that's basically the setup.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's very well said. We do get some callbacks to, Scream 4, which is
right.
Kind of forgotten by Scream 5 and 6. I feel like everybody remembers the first two. They acknowledge the third one exists. 4 was like this own little pocket bubble, and then like, we're going to relaunch everything. And someone's like, what about 4? So they brought back.
I think folks only watched 4 because that was the last one Wes Craven directed.
Right.
It was kind of a non-starter because it kind of came out and like, but then a few years later, they did a reboot. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we did a retrospective a while back last year when 5 was coming out, and watching them back to back. For what Wes had intended for this series to be, 4, I think why it's ignored by a lot of people is because it pulls back the veil and kind of pokes at the first 3 films and fans of the franchise. It was Wes basically making fun, in a way, better than in 3, of himself and what he started with the Scream movies, because that started a whole different trend of the meta slasher. And if you look at 4 is a commentary on basically what he restarted over 1, 2, and 3. It's a little more serious, but that's basically the way we all felt when we were talking about it. It's his commentary. So some fans may take, issue with it, and like you said, watch it because it was Wes's film, but he makes some comments and statements about fandom in there that maybe some folks didn't quite like. Who knows with Scream 4? I like 4 better than 3. 3 was way too
3's the worst
comedy faced. That was really like, just sad. It was satirizing itself, and 4 was commenting on the craze that had been built up from the Scream that he started, is what 4 was. Which makes me wonder what his 5 and 6 would have been, because apparently he had planned on 6 films.
I didn't know that he had the whole thing mapped out. I just kind of assumed it was like, hey, we got enough money, we'll make another one.
I'm not sure if he had the last 2 fully fleshed out, because 4 did okay at the box office, but I think there were stories that Wes was going to have 6 films, that the next trilogy was kind of a commentary and taking it to a different direction than the first 3 did. Unfortunately, he passed before we found that out, so we have 5 and 6 here. So
and then he died.
But
I think this.
How dare he?
I think last year's film, I feel, has a little bit more. Although I wasn't a huge fan of that one, I think last year's film has a little bit more bite to it, a little bit more grit than this one. Especially with the whole killing off what's his name, David Arquette's Dewey. Yeah. Although we do get his theme in this one when Gale comes around. But I don't know. I agree. I think it's a great opening. Scream 6 has a great opening. It's pretty cool. At no point did I ever feel like we were in New York. In fact, it's filmed in Montreal. I mean, a lot of movies are. It just felt like there's nothing really distinctive New York about what I'm watching here.
Well, I mean, they did
it's
the
a
whole like, subway thing and
the bodegas, which are very New York and small, like they are in New York. I think they did those things decently. I mean, you're right. I mean, it costs a lot of money to shoot in New York, but at least I think the conceit of that new setting got us out of the suburban world.
And I feel like, you know, with the trauma that these two siblings endured, sure, I like the fact that one of them is trying to just move on and not deal with it. One of them is actually in therapy by the Mission Impossible guy, Henry Czerny or whatever his name is. And of course, we know he's going to die. Duh. I'll get to that later. But I wish that there was more of a chasm between the two sisters of, like, I almost feel like one of them should have gone totally Laurie Strode and just like wanted to isolate herself from everything. And like, if I don't interact with anybody and if I just, hole up myself and prepare for anything that can come, then nothing like that will ever happen to me again. But why would I put myself in a huge metropolis area where we're in a day and age where I'm always going to be seen and around people, and with all the coverage that has been made for these legacy killings that I recently survived. Why would I want to be in like the most populated place? I don't know. I just.
Well, I mean, I think I don't have all the answers to that, but I think the timeline's interesting, especially the way that the Carpenter sisters, Tara and Sam, are treated. This is a year after the events of the first or the fifth movie, which I almost called the first movie because it's kind of restarting.
It kind of is.
Everything,
right, exactly.
Right? But I mean, if you look at Woodsboro, all of these killings are tied up in that town.
You're right.
They all through the previous 5 movies, it's like someone was related to or screwing or knew somebody or whatever who ended up being a Ghostface Killer. So going to New York, I don't blame them, and I think it was interesting that these sisters, you would think that they would be heralded as these survivors of these serial killer attacks, but it's kind of turned against them because internet conspiracy theorists have posited that like maybe they had something to do with killing these passionate film nerds.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
Very nice touch. A touch of Amanda Knox to all that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, but like Jeff said, I like the whole alley reveal of Flash Thompson from the Spider-Man movies being the killer, and was it Tony Rovio?
My lobby boy.
Yeah. He was in Grand Budapest too. I think.
Yeah,
that was my line.
There you go. Yeah.
Give me back my lobby boy.
Yeah. And so I like that. But then once the movie ends and you go back to that initial reveal in your memory, knowing what you know, how does it make sense that those guys got killed by who we eventually see to be the killers, these new supporting characters, which were basically, it's just so convoluted. I mean, I feel like, or not even convoluted, but just so overly coincidental. It's just, as soon as Dermot Mulroney's character is introduced, I'm like, he's the bad guy. That's it. He's the bad guy. As soon as he's introduced, I'm like, yeah, he's the bad guy.
I didn't peg him for the bad guy, mostly because he's got that kind of like middle-aged dad bod gut. I'm like, I don't see him. Maybe he's like a mastermind, but I don't see him running around doing like those crazy Ghostface maneuvers. I mean, he's got his 2 kids, again, spoiler alert, are, so I guess he had 3 kids, one of whom turned out to be, was it Jack Quaid?
Jack Quaid's character,
yeah, from the previous movie. So we're going back to the family avenging the dead
Richie.
sibling killer, Richie, right? So I can the whole reason those 2 died, the 2 roommate killers in the beginning, is they were supposed to be apprentices, helping out with like this Ghostface thing and getting revenge on the Carpenter sisters, but they started getting a little bit overzealous and wanting to get ahead of the program, as it were.
Okay,
and they couldn't get happen.
How did the detectives' kids know that these film students were trying to start off on this whole ghost?
Oh, they mention it. They mention it at the end in the dialogue, in the exposition that they have. They mentioned the 2 roommates, and they started the conspiracy, and they talked to the 2 film roommates because one of them was in the class with, I think, the female roommate was in the class, their film class, and she was talking to him, and they were on the message board, and they were starting basically the cult of Scream. So they were on, well, not message, but Facebook group, whatever.
No, yeah, they did mention message board.
Message board, and they met them through that, and they kind of stoked the fire with those 2 guys on purpose. They do that through exposition near the end, and it's one of the kind of the issue. I really enjoyed this film. I rate it one of the highest of the Scream films, at least of the sequels versus the first one. I enjoy a lot of things. Where I'm at with it is, for a series that has been built on pulling back the veil on tropes, the Scream trope that we have now were the tropes that caused me not to enjoy the film quite as much as I like, because we're in New York. They do a fresh opening, a different opening. We're approaching this. We're exploring, which I like seeing now in horror films, the aftermath of the horror film credits. So the final girls or whatnot, what happens after those events? I like that exploration. Being a horror fan, you usually don't get that, though your mind starts to go, but and all of that. I liked what they did with the sisters, and the fact that even though Scream started on the nostalgia of the slasher, this is a modern slasher film, which we don't actually get too much. While it does have callbacks, for the most part, the kids are dealing with social media stuff. That's a prime front and center. They're dealing with modern problems with still working within some of that framework of the slasher movie. What I didn't like was the actual forced scream shots. The scream shot, the use of Nick Cave's wonderful song, which I used for a college project, my final college project. I did a music video to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Red Right Hand. They use that like 3 times in here. They've got
you gotta help me out here, Mark. What are you talking about?
The song.
Which song? I don't
Red
know.
Right Hand, Nick Cave, where you hear the gong, dun, dun, dun. They do it every time they do the wide upshot that they crane down on the group who is starting to talk about the rules. They have it in every Scream, just like they have every booty shot and hot car scene in Fast and Furious. In every Scream scene, they have a scene where it's a school building or a college building or something. Camera starts up top, and then it comes down. And every time they do that, they've got the gong and the opening music to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Red Right Hand. And they put that in here. And then they have the rule explanation scene, and they have the big reveal. The 2 things that are most tropish, or that are Scream tropes, are the 2 things I didn't want in this film, because they almost felt shoehorned in. You're doing these other cool new things, and then you get these moments, and I'm like, no, we're past this now. This is the 6th film. We don't need this scene in there anymore.
Well, I don't know if we need that scene, because I agree. I think it's part of the problem is, as much as I love Jasmine Savoy Brown, she's playing Randy, the film nerd from the first one. Her his nephew or niece, right? She's the one delivering all this stuff in true kind of Randy fashion, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, because during a lot of the rest of the picture, she is kind of like the spark and the sassy one of the group, but she is damaged and traumatized by what happened to her in the last movie, except in this scene. It does seem very much like, she's just slipping into Randy mode and delivering almost like a stand-up bit. So that was out of place. I like the expositions in the movies. I think I'm just with you, Mark. I don't like the delivery. I think you give that to a different character in a different context to explain what's going on, and not necessarily like, as you mentioned, here's where we do the thing.
Are you talking about the exposition, or are you talking about like the horror commentary type meta stuff?
The
rules, the
Yeah,
rules.
okay.
Yeah, and the only real revelatory trope that she sort of reminds us now is that legacy characters can get killed, where in the old days they would always hang them around forever because Dewey getting killed in the last one. I agree with you, Mark. That's the least interesting part of it, and maybe from here on out they don't have to do that as much. I also think it's not particularly interesting, and I've always thought it's been a little bit of the weakness of the sequels is the revelation of who is the actual killer. While you're all wondering who that is, it could be any of them, and they could all probably be justified. I mean, this one is a little weak in the sense of really, okay, I have to figure this out and you have to explain it all, blah blah blah. I think that's uninteresting. What I did think was interesting here is in the change of the setting, whether it was Canada or the actual Big Apple. New York is a scary city. Alleys and the closeness of buildings and subways and all that, there's always danger right there, even down the street. Like there's a couple scenes where they're sort of hit and grabbed by people. You don't expect that in the suburbs. And part of the charm of the original Scream movies is they turn garage door openers and simple trips down to the basement to get another bottle of beer into places of horror, like they were haunted houses or caves or whatever the hell you want to call it. Here, New York is scary, and it mostly takes place at night. And they set up some very good set pieces in this. I mean, I think the scene where they go into the bodega is very good because suddenly the killer isn't holding on to the trope of, well, I have to slash them with the knife.
That was pretty good.
I can smash them by tossing these shelves onto them, or I can somehow, overwhelm this rather doofusy clerk and get his rifle from him, and suddenly I can blow their heads off. Yeah. And just the fact that they did that to me was like, okay, that's surprising me, and I'm a little frightened for it.
Because you don't typically see Ghostface with a shotgun, with a knife. So that was
in each of those settings, it's not just one person like, okay, they set up this person and now they're going to get killed in the garage door thing like they did. It's like, here's the two sisters. One of them could get killed here. So I think that gave it some surprise. Or when they're going across the apartments on the ladder, are they going to fall? Is the ladder going to go away? That kind of stuff, I think, is giving this a little bit of, dare I say, novelty, considering it's the sixth film in. I wasn't sure quite where those scenes were going. And then by the end with the subway, and they really draw that out. I mean, it's got nods to the French Connection. It's got nods to a number of films. But I love the fact that, there's a bunch of different people on the thing because it's Halloween. And you're not sure who's who and who's going to get it. And they got separated by the luck of, Manhattan crowds. So some of that kind of stuff to me gave this some real, sort of juice.
Those are good scenes that you mentioned, except for who has a 12-foot ladder in their New York apartment, which is probably a studio apartment. Here, I'm gonna hoist this ladder.
It's an extension ladder, so
he's one of them was a painter on the weekends. Come on.
Well, no, I got the feeling that I can't remember the guy's name.
He's like neighbor sex toy.
Hunky neighbor sex toy. Yeah.
I got the feeling he was like in construction or something. Yeah. But here's the thing: in the moment, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking,
you're looking for logic, David.
I want to
too much logic.
Well, it's not even that. I've got a long ladder in my house. I mean, I don't live in a New York studio apartment, but then again, I don't, I don't work in construction. So maybe that's the thing.
Thing was like right next to the window. If you have a long ladder in your house, you're going to your garage or you're going to your basement. Hold on. And there's no time.
Well, I haven't seen this guy's apartment. I have not seen this guy's apartment. If it's anything like those two college students had in the beginning,
it's pretty nice.
Like, I'm glad Courtney Cox was in this movie because that was like a friend's apartment. Like, right?
He must have made an awful lot of money on those book sales.
That's right.
Right. So what I'm thinking is like Mr. Hunky neighbor guy. If he lives in an apartment like that, he'd need a 12-foot ladder to just change the bulbs. But here's the thing: that ladder. I'm glad we're talking about it because the problem with this movie, it's always like 2 steps forward and 1 step back for me in terms of the tension and the drama, because there's one of the new kids that's introduced here, Annika, who kind of becomes the love interest
girlfriend. Mindy?
Yeah.
Right.
She, is she a suspect? Is she a victim? Whatever. We find out that she's a victim because one of the Ghostface killers breaks into secrets themselves in the apartment very effectively, I think, because like all the friends are kind of sitting around like telling stories and like having a good time and finally getting a chance to relax. Meanwhile, in the other room, horrible things are happening, and the revelation of just the extent of those horrible things kind of sneaks up on you, and then it's all at once. Everything just kind of goes to hell. Annika gets stabbed in the stomach really severely. Now, and there's another character that happens later on that gets stabbed to a degree that I'm like, no fucking way.
Two of them later on.
3.
And
well,
if you count,
talk about
yeah,
Chad.
you're right. Yeah,
Chad.
There's 3.
That's right.
There's 3.
Yeah, you're
Well,
right.
but, okay.
Yeah.
But the problem with Annika getting stabbed in the gut like that is that Ghostface is trying to break through the door. The classic scene of like we've put the bookshelf or whatever up against the door so the killer can't get in. Now we're going to try to escape. There's got to be one person to hold them up. I thought she was going to actually stay behind and just like prop up the shelf or something so everyone else can escape. No, she actually goes down into the ladder, and I'm just thinking like
with a gut wound.
Right. But it's not just a gut wound. Like they show him like twisting it, and like they had to have been falling out like Drew Barrymore style from the first one.
That's the big mistake in this movie.
Right.
Is that kind of stuff.
Like
the violence is, for all the realism that they conjure with those other things to your point, Ian, it's like that's where they just start. I mean, David, I'll trade you 3 or 4 deaths that should have happened long before they expired with your ladder, because the real incredulity here is how many people who should have been dead in 10 seconds by being gutted somehow survive, even running back to the end scene like I'm okay even though I was just gutted 2 hours earlier. I mean, come on.
Well, and here's
the closing scene. I'm like,
that's what I mean.
Well, yeah, it was the closing scene though, David, so you really were done. It's fine, you can go home. Right. But no, okay, so the thing is, Annika, when she's crawling across the ladder and then Ghostface comes up and he starts shaking the ladder.
Right.
I felt really bad for her because she truly was an innocent in this whole situation. And that's one of the things that we get to spend time with these characters.
Right.
We get to see them really interact. And they're not just slasher fodder like we were kind of talking about a couple
couple
of weeks ago. We see them as real human beings. So when we find out, okay, she's not the killer and she's definitely going to be a victim. She could have just been slashed across the arm or something, so it's more difficult for her to go on the ladder. I felt so sad when Ghostface was so cruelly like shaking the ladder and she was holding on for dear life and then she fell to her death. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, her guts would have hit the ground long before her body did, because they should have been hanging out of her torso.
See, and that's the problem. I'm glad you guys brought it up, because that's the problem I have. And I, being a horror fan, I watch it way excessive. Okay, you do get those type of injuries where you're like, how they survive, but you get onesie twosies. Even in Scream, it was a novelty in 2 that Dewey survived, and they explained it away because of damaged tissue from the previous stabbing that he said. You know, I mean, you're like, okay, because you like Dewey. I thought in 5 he was the really highlight of that film, and they actually gave his character a little bit so he wasn't just doofus. In this one, while we accept so much, you are accepting of some injuries and such in a horror film. Usually that's near the end of the film. But not only do we get 3 on-screen folks who survive, we get 2 more people who were stabbed and killed who survive off-screen, mentioned in dialogue at the end of the game. Oh, don't worry. Gail and Annika, not Annika, I forgot who else it was. Tara are going to survive. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like,
Gail and Mindy.
Or Gail and Mindy.
Because
like,
Mindy shows up at the end, and she's like, I don't even know if she has a bandage, right?
She's running. And I'm just...
And Kirby too, the FBI agent played by Hayden Panettiere.
Kirby didn't even need to be in this movie. You know, the only
she's the red herring.
Red herring.
She's the red herring.
That ticked me off to no end. It's like, first of all, she's a forgettable character from Scream 4,
but you know, it's interesting.
She was just kind of ridiculous. You know, it's like,
It's interesting. You bring up a very interesting point, and I love where you're going with this, because for me, it's like they did so many things right where, you spend time with the characters, so you feel invested in them, and they're not just, instantly been brought on to die. The bond between the sisters, I think, is established in scene after scene, and you wonder, like I said, in the bodega, maybe one of them is going to get killed. That investment in that possibility, because there are two people there, makes it scarier. But they do these dumb things, and it always just boggles the mind to me that people in Hollywood don't take that advice that you just said. Is like, if she had just been slashed on the arm and she's got a wound and it's bleeding a little bit, but she's able to defend herself, she's in a condition to get across that ladder, it makes it all the better. But I'm sorry, but when you're going like this and then you're raising the knife up, I mean, I always remember I can count probably on one hand movies that have played fair with people getting wounded. I'm just going to throw one movie reference in it because I think it was so novel at the time, and I don't know if I've ever seen it bettered since then. But in LA Confidential, when they go into that ramshackle thing at the end, they're shooting against all those cops coming for them. Ed Exley is shot in the shoulder, and he can't do a fucking thing with a gun. He can't load it. He can't run. He's like shaking in shock.
Yeah.
And Russell Crowe, only because he's below with the shotgun, is able to stop the two guys. And he still gets shot enough that by the end, he's hooked up 2 months later with all this shit on him and can't talk. And here, I'm gutted from my stomach up to my breasts, and yet I'm crawling across a ladder. Why do they do that? Just all they had to do is take your advice, Ian. Maybe they're watching your show for the next one, and just make it a surface wound or a flesh wound, or certainly not a life-ending wound. And you'll have the same film, but a better scene, because you're not straining the credibility of that.
And I'm totally checked out when these things
drives
happen.
me nuts.
It pulls me out of the movie.
I agree with you.
When in that scene, when Chad's holding them off and letting the sisters go, both Ghostface killers are going shit.
Yes.
Like literally, they're filleting him.
Yes.
If this was a Looney Tune cartoon and Chad was Daffy Duck, afterwards he would take a drink of water and all this water would come out of his body. That's what would happen.
And he'd move his bill over and go,
yeah. I mean, how are you supposed to let us take
slash your teeth
seriously?
Well, it's anticlimactic, because you do the right thing and you make these people so they're not fodder. We got to spend time with these characters. I was surprised how we got to spend some time even with the newer characters, enough to feel like this is an integrated group, and we don't want them to die. We like this group. They've got a good banter between each other, everything. So you don't give me that and then don't kill them. It sounds bad, but you know what I'm saying, because you're making me invested. So when you kill them, it has more emotional punch than they were just slasher fodder. But when you make them survive, you bring a ridiculousness to them, to where we're in a cartoon now. We're in Fast and Furious 7 now.
Think about it. They're in the same place. This movie ends in the same place that the last movie ended. The core four are still they're damaged, but they're still there. They're alive. They're intact. But like you were saying, Mark, like Chad, that moment that I was talking about, that could have been a heroic sacrifice. To occupy the Ghostface killers, to let the sisters leave. But no, it's like we see them on a hospital gurney. What?
Yeah, and who in the horror movie audience out there expects everybody to be saved? I mean, to your point, if you've got the stakes where you care about them, then if somebody heroically dies or gives himself up or can't make it across the ladder because she's too weak, because she's already been sort of slaughtered, that's going to have some weight. And I think we'd expect that in a horror movie, but you don't expect them to be superhuman beings.
And I think that the part of the problem, I think, is that this movie, especially because the characters are more, I think, fleshed out here than they were in Scream 5. It kind of makes me want to go back and watch Scream 5 again, because now I actually like these characters. I kind of want to spend more time with them.
And that's what makes me more angry too, is because I actually like the core four. I like the actors. I like the characters.
Yes.
I just like. I can't. I mean, I thought Jack Quaid in the last movie was really good.
Yeah.
But so far in these new movies, the antagonists are just weak sauce.
They are.
The other thing too that I think happens with some of this is, again, I'm not suggesting that this has to be like Blake Edwards had a rule of comedy that he would set up the joke, tell the joke, and then there was a joke right after that you
Yeah.
never expected. So it was always sort of doubly funny, like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. Here, they need to do something after the killing, which isn't just the cops bursting through the door and somehow they're saved or like that. Like, for example, on that ladder, Ian and friends, if you were doing that, wouldn't it have been interesting if, somehow maybe Tara's already dead, but whoever the last person is, but Ghost guy is shaking the ladder and he's got to get on the ladder a little bit to shake it, to try to get this person off. And he gets in a little trouble. Like maybe he's like, they've almost defeated him. Yes. Yeah. Like they've almost defeated the Ghostface Killer. And then he, just by the skin of his teeth, escapes back in the window. Give me something like that. But the one thing that I also was going to criticize about this, despite the fact that I liked it, a lot of it was fun. Well, no, this is a very mixed movie for me. Like there's a lot of good stuff here, more than I thought there would be. And yet there's these key mistakes that are dummy mistakes, almost like missing free throws in basketball when nobody's waving their arms in front of you, make the basket, win the game. But the other thing too is like, these people are fighters, which is good, and they're not dummies who just don't know how to do it. But then, like, how many blows do the Ghostface Killers take in this? But they keep getting up, and it's like, but I mean, again, if you're able to get up after being gutted, I suppose anybody can get up. But how about just knocking the person out and figuring out, well, we got the one killer, and then you find out that it's two others who are doing it. So you think you've got him, but you don't. I mean, there's things like that better screenwriters need to start coming in and saying, can't do that, done it before. Can't do that, doesn't make sense. If I'm going to have a ladder there, I better know he's a painter.
Well, I think Jeff, to your point, I think it would have been interesting, if not necessarily the Ghostface goes out onto the ladder, but because we set up the movie that two of the would-be Ghostface killers get killed.
Right.
What if, because kind of the whole conceit of this is that there is a plot involving all of the previous ghost faces. There's like 9 of them or something. And
And
the
museum of
them, and the different masks end up showing. Well, it's a bit. I think it looks cool, but when you think about it,
it's like that's a lot of prep.
But I did like the idea of the different masks showing up at the different crime scenes because it's like, oh, whoever's doing this is going in deep. I think it would have been interesting. I don't know how you pull this off. It'd probably need several passes. But what if you kept like different ghost faces attacking them, and a number of them actually just get killed? So you never know how big this kind of ghost face can. Instead of having all 3 of them show, I think the visual of 3 ghost faces showing up at the end was great. But then they start pulling masks off, and it's like,
well, help me out. There were really only 2 because Mulroney never really donned the mask. He was just kind of orchestrating everything.
Right.
And,
he was a ghost face in name only.
And when Quinn died, the promiscuous roommate, the new character who's a suspect, in our eyes, because anybody who's new is, that could be the one. When Quinn dies and we don't see a body, ding, she could be a suspect. Because we don't see a body. And Mulroney comes out and he's like, and then he's just like, okay.
Here's you hit it, and it's, I really wish the series would I really enjoyed this film. For a modern horror film, this is one of the better, especially wide release modern horror films. Okay. I did enjoy it.
Megan.
But
go ahead.
There are, well, I mean, I'm still
I love Megan.
And Megan, but
Cocaine
it still has warts on it. And one of the warts is you're doing something new. And as we mentioned, we get at least 2 tropish scenes in here that felt shoehorned in. Oh, we're a Scream movie. We have to have these in it. One of them is the reveal. Grow some balls and make one of these damn legacy characters the killer, for crying out loud. Because like you said, David, by the 6th movie now, you would have expected at least one of them, and it would have been an interesting exploration in trauma. And I know they couldn't get Neve Campbell back, but they could have. The whole subject of meta and what happens and how it affects people's lives going forward, experiencing these kills. It's always family members of the other killer, or
it's so ridiculous. It's so Scooby-Doo.
Right. To where if they would have pulled it, I know they couldn't get Neve back, but could you imagine Scream 5 if it was Neve? And so then you had to have Gail versus Neve. In a final battle. I mean, for a Scream fan, your mind would just pop.
I think,
that
you know,
point.
and I think, David, I think you and I talked about would have been interesting if she had been the killer in the last one. I think it would have been cherry on top if they could have done the Drew Barrymore thing from the first Scream, sort of, in that they announced this new horror movie from Wes Craven. Drew Barrymore's on the poster. She's dead, Janet Leigh style, in the first 10 minutes.
Right.
Imagine if all the press around Scream 6 is Nev
Campbell's
coming
back.
No. Imagine if
No.
they're saying she's not coming back.
That would have been
The first
And then-
one.
Oh, that's what I
and
expected.
then
I fully
the
expected her to be
mask
the
comes
killer.
off and it's Nev Campbell, and like,
would have been
holy shit.
Yeah,
genius.
it was a whole
Yeah.
misdirect in the
I would have
PR
given this
campaign.
movie 3.5 stars. Just
Yeah, I'm with you. In fact, Ian, that's funny you say that because I kept thinking there was too much press about her not doing it for her to not do it. Like I thought that was where they're going to go. Is like she wanted to keep her fame going and sort of, you know, whatever else was the motivation.
if any of the legacy characters would be the killer that are still around, or I think it would have been very interesting and kind of surprising for it to be Gail. Think about it. She's everywhere.
Yes, and
And
she's
she
the one who
has-
made she
made
profited the
book.
most.
She did the special.
Sold the movie rights.
Yeah, she has access to everything.
Yes.
Now I don't know if she would make a stupid shrine out of an old theater like
No,
these
but
guys
get rid of that scene.
somehow did, but. But like she was so traumatized that she wanted, and she felt so victimized that she wanted to never feel this way again, and she wanted to reverse all this. She wasn't getting like, you know, haunted mirror flashbacks visits from her, you know, father or whatever like that. But she was just like, I'm done being a victim. I'm going to turn this thing around, and she becomes totally warped and demented.
Well, play the angle. You could still have your young Skeet Ulrich type character who's doing all the killings, yet she's the mastermind. It'd be a similar twist to what you have here, only instead of being the sheriff and his two kids who happen to be related to the victim from the last film, it's Gail with her boy toy who she's convinced who was a Scream fanatic. Stay with me.
No, I'm liking it. I'm laughing out of light.
Gail has the boy toy who is just obsessed with her and the whole idea of Ghostface. So she manages to convince this guy to do the kills because she's going to write another book. She's going to marry him. They're going to run and live even more richly, you know, however you want to spit it. But she convinces this guy to go around doing Ghostface killing. Then at the end, even with the shrine, he builds it for her or whatnot. At the end, you have him be revealed as the, you know, and then Gail comes out and it's like, you know, you'd still have your reveal. You do a legacy. You give something that gives impact better than, oh no, we just got word from the hospital. Gail's going to live. I'm like, wait.
That totally ticked me off. Totally.
You know, here's one other angle to it. I don't mean to necessarily rewrite this.
There's a weak pulse.
Suggest this is where 7 could go, but they set up some interesting things here, which I thought after a while they were going to go with, and that is that they could have gone with like a killer that we don't know, that they've just been like a copycat, or you know, it's part of this weird sense like they want to be famous now, or you know, almost like a cult kind of following.
It opened with that, but they
exactly.
Yeah.
And I will just tell you a quick story, and I'll be very brief on this. I once went to a Jack the Ripper symposium, and they had the foremost Jack the Ripper expert who worked for Scotland Yard for many years, and they asked him after he gave his speech on why the killings still compel us and are holding our imaginations. And it's of course because he isn't caught, but he said he also thinks it's because we maybe don't know exactly why the person did it. And they said, well, who do you think did it? And he goes, I think if I get to heaven, if there is a heaven, and I ask God who it is, he's going to tell me who Jack the Ripper, and I'm going to go, who? Like it's somebody that you wouldn't suspect.
I'm sure
it's not somebody in that circle of 20 or 25 good suspects. It's like, oh, and why did that person do it? I have no clue, but they just did it. And I think there's something about the modality of evil or the unexplainable evil. We've all become very Agatha Christie, CSI, you know, where we always have to have the answer. When Simon Oakland explained why Norman Bates did it in Psycho, he said it was because he couldn't get over the fact that his mother died. But we didn't have all that backstory telling us how about she was sexually abusive and a religious zealot. Not that there's anything wrong with Psycho 2 or 3 and some of those kind of things. I mean, God knows they did the Bates Motel very well about all that. But I love the fact that, okay, you know, Norman Bates was acting like his mother, and that's just evil enough.
Well, it's
You
also,
don't necessarily have all the psychology that gives all the motive and his total reasoning. I think not knowing is sometimes scarier.
it's also deranged enough. I mean, this
Exactly.
guy this guy was awkward and odd
That's right.
and socially, inept kind of thing. And so
That's right.
it kind of on top of him, even though he loved his mother, he was always being kind of picked on by his mother, probably. So it was like, or
But
they
we
had
infer-
too close a
Right.
relationship.
But we infer that in the first movie.
Right.
It's more
Well, I
inferred.
think yeah, if they had just been some random person that was not connected to anything, someone
Mhm.
that just was from the city, like at the
Right.
end they could have been like,
Yes.
"Who are you?" And he just says, "I'm just a New Yorker," and then he
Yes.
kills all.
And see, that to me would be the greatest trope breaker of them
Well,
all, because it's like, we're going to completely break precedent, even though you're thinking it's going to be one of these characters and you're primed for that the whole time. We're not.
Yeah.
It's the whole Hunt for Red October thing. You're the cook. I mean, a character you have no idea about ended up being the guy.
Or was that Under Siege? Oh, sorry.
No,
Oh,
but
look,
the third act of this, guys, come on. I mean, that theater thing and everything, and
here's the problem is they've got some cool moments, like we mentioned Chad's death. I thought was nasty and somewhat heroic. We've got the death of was it Ethan, the other son, who was the other Ghostface. When he gets that, Jenna Ortega stabs him through the mouth and like keeps going.
Yeah.
I thought that was fantastic, except he does the damn Die Hard thing at the end where he
he's not
the
dead.
Scream thing.
All these people have bodies that can take all this punishment.
He would not have been able to scream like that as he charged forth with the knife. But here's my overall problem with this movie, and I think it's very apropos that it opens with Tony Revolori's character when he goes back to his apartment. What's he watching? Friday the 13th, Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan. What scene is he watching? He's watching the scene where I think it was Tamra, the snooty girl. She gets killed by Jason in the bathroom. And it's one of the nastiest kills in Friday the 13th franchise history, because he doesn't do anything creative. He just bursts in, shatters the mirror over the sink, and then picks up a shard of glass and then stabs her to death off screen. All right. You can see her cowering in the corner. She's crying. She doesn't know what's going on. It's very cruel. And I think that was a great way to set up some of these murders, because the first bunch of slayings we see in this film are really nasty.
Very cruel.
And I think the problem is they pull too many punches with this. All of the characters in this movie who are brutally stabbed through, like Mindy, as much again as I love that character and I love Jasmine Savoy Brown, she should have died on that train.
Sure, totally.
Gail Weathers should have died. There should have been this feeling at the end when we're in that theater that the Carpenter sisters, they might not know it, but we know that they are up against an unstoppable force that is heartless, and there's no escape.
I would also argue, Ian, that it would also challenge the audience to say, are you better for surviving, knowing that these friends of yours have been slaughtered, and now you have to live with that? You thought it was bad, survivor's guilt and all this kind of stuff. Now how's that gonna? I mean, again, sometimes the people who live to the final reel or survive the nuclear holocaust or whatever have it worse in a certain way. I mean, add some depth to it. They added depth throughout it, with the characterizations, the caring, again, different weapons, different situations and scenarios. But in that last third, they just pulled all those punches that they had done so great a job of setting up.
Well, it actually takes away from the Carpenter sisters.
It does.
I was fully hoping, and again, I love Savoy Brown. I loved her brother character. I loved the dynamic between these. At the same time, for everything they went through, and now we have two final girls who had to pay, and their friends had to pay for their actions in the previous film.
That's
like
right.
you
A
said,
big price.
Jeff. But they also get the bond back together at the end of this film, and these two end up being badasses at the end of the film, and being the. So those two are the two that should walk off into the sunset. I mentioned it in my review. The main character body count should have been a lot higher in here. Not only that, but the Gale death I thought was fitting. It sounds bad. I love the character and what they've done with her over the series. That said, the way she was battling, I'm like, they're not going to have her survive this. I didn't want that, because that was such a fitting way for her character to finish things in that massive of a fight, you expect that from Gale, and you're like, it would be fitting end the way Dewey actually had a good ending in the 5, that storyline. And now you've pretty much put the kibosh on your legacy. You can let this new series breathe on its own, which it does for its most part. It breathes with these new characters on its own. They pass the torch successfully. And Gale doesn't even add anything at the end. You could just have her die. Everybody expected her to die.
Yeah, right.
In my
And
mind,
everybody
she
was
said-
fine.
Yeah.
And everybody was fine with it.
It begs the question too, you know, what price for those two sisters to get back together? All
Yeah,
that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
in
then
my
they
mi-
walk away.
Yeah.
They're back together, but boy, what a cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have been perfect if she died, because it would have been just like the Star Wars sequel trilogies. You know, Han died in Force Awakens. You know, Luke died and Leia. You know, so bring back Neve Campbell and kill her in the next one. But no, she's got a weak pulse, and she made it. Whatever.
Yeah, it would have been cool too, like if she had done that thing where she grabs the mask as she's dying and pulls it off, and she sees who the killer is.
Right.
What if
And
she had
only
said,
she did. Yeah.
yeah, but what if she had said, "Who the fuck are you?"
That would have been
Something
awesome.
like that, because that would have given us a clue
Yeah.
that, well, it's not someone we've seen before.
Someone we
it's
know,
some
yeah.
other
Or she
connection.
could have said Rollo Tomasi.
No, but
Bring it back
saying
to LA Confidential. I love it.
saying who the fuck are you would be a perfect like Gale's last
Totally
words
Gale,
too.
yeah.
But
It'd
it-
be
but-
to- you know,
Well, it's in-
everything's
Well, it's interesting too, because here we are 6 movies in, and they are starting to add a little more depth to it, because they're getting rid of some of the cornball tropes. There wasn't nearly as much humor in this as there
No.
has been in the past. It wasn't jokey and glib.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it was fairly serious, but wonder, could they ever go as serious? Like I remember Pauline Kael once famously wrote in her review of Brian De Palma's Blowout, the movie's about John Travolta's character finding the perfect scream, and he finds it for the movie. Unfortunately, it's a real death. But he uses that screen. It's the only thing he gets out of that entire
Mhm.
excursion. He doesn't save the politician. He doesn't save his reputation. He doesn't save the girl. All he does is get the scream. And that's what he was first taxed with in the first 10 minutes of doing. And she goes, it's cynical, it's nasty, but boy, that's horror, isn't it?
That would be cool if John Travolta's character from Blowout was the villain for the next movie.
And then they
And
killed
he's
him
like
because
sound recording.
he was doing those awful phone commercials.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
With the
with
Scrubs
Zach
guys.
Braff, don't get me started. All right, we got a couple of comments that we're gonna use to close out the show because we're running a bit long. Not that I don't love talking with you gentlemen about this. It's been a great conversation, I think.
Very much.
RJB40 said they could have used New York a little better, but who knows if they had restrictions. Good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, true.
It's a modest
Um,
budget that made well
Yeah.
beyond its budget.
Yeah. And at some point, a killer needs to get away. I think that's true. I mean, what would happen if
Yeah.
there was a real
Mhm.
cliffhanger here?
So where do we go now? That's the thing. It's like, because the
Mhm.
killer didn't get away.
Right.
They go to they go to Montreal, David. So
They should. In my review, I mentioned this because I thought about this while I was watching the movie and while I was writing. I'm like, the fact that every main character is getting filleted and they're surviving. It reminded me, and I can't believe I'm referencing this, but the last Fast and Furious movie, Fast 9, there's that moment where they kind of regroup, and you might know where I'm going, Mark, but where I think Tyrese Gibson is like, they're regrouping, and they just, and he's like, guys,
I love it.
isn't it odd the way, like, why are we alive? Isn't it odd that we've been in so much? We've survived so much. How is it? What if we're special? How is it that we survived? And he holds up his jacket and there's bullet holes in it. He's like, how did we survive this? And yeah, I mean, you could probably survive bullet holes easier than you could all these fillet stabbings. It's like,
Yeah, it's that's
Ask Ed Exley.
see, and that's what gets me, and it almost feels like they slightly missed the original point of Scream. In
Yeah.
all honesty, you're bringing a new spin to the slasher trope, and the slasher trope isn't everybody survives. The kills are brutal. They're nicely brutal in this, but then you have to have the stakes of them dying. I understand they set the core 4, but in all honesty, being the horror fan that I'm sure we've watched plenty of horror, that's foreshadowing that at least one or more of the core 4 are going to die because they've come up with a nifty name. They're saluting, they're celebrating. You're like, okay, one of those fuckers is going to die, and they're going to die really badly, and they won't be the core 4 anymore because that's a foreshadowing setup. But they break that rule. But in doing so, you actually take away from what everybody went through. So by the end, while you can kind of buy it in Fast and Furious, because to me that's just become
Well, it's a cartoon, yeah.
that's become a superhero movie with cars.
Right.
But here, as we've all said, they've done so good in establishing actually, for a horror film, meaty characters that have at least a little bit to not kill them actually takes away what you've worked hard to set up.
Yeah, totally.
And leave them survive, and go ahead.
I was going to say, if RGB 40 says, if one gets away, that's the perfect setup for the next movie. Now they know there's a real threat out there.
Right.
Which is, David, make your say what you wanted to say, and I want to make one last point before I forget it. But yeah,
I mean, we have a New York City detective in this movie, and he becomes, the main brain behind all this. Okay. Once his daughter dies, supposedly, I guess what I'm saying is give this detective a partner, because once this detective is traumatized by the supposed death of his daughter, there's no funeral or nothing, no time, because there's all these killings happening. But like, it would have been interesting if the detective had a partner who was also starting to get involved because of what was happening with this detective's daughter being killed, and then that detective starts to put things together like, okay, well, my partner was acting really strange lately, and started getting suspicious about him, and then that detective was trying to get involved and maybe help these kids. I don't know. It seems like as far as a police presence and a detective presence, that's all we got.
Yeah, you're right. There was no partner. It's kind of like they're breaking some of the tropes that we've seen, but not necessarily in an effective way.
Right.
You're right. I think that would have been a nice additional layer of complexity there. But one thing that I thought of, and it was RJB, you kind of reminded me of this on the subway scene where the train where. It's a very nice setup because you've got the two parallel trains. The gang are gonna get on the train and go someplace safe where they can be together. Maybe it's the final confrontation.
The final confrontation.
The
it was
theater,
a confrontation.
Right.
Yeah.
The trap.
Right. They get separated because the crazy New York late night or nightlife. They're on two different trains, and Mindy is at the back of this train. She's keeping an eye on Ethan, who she suspects, is part of the is maybe the killer. Turns out she was right, but the lights keep flickering on and off. They go through these pockets where she can't see anything. It's almost got this strobe effect, and we get this. I think it's effectively done, but I've seen it too much. The whole thing of like you see the killer at the back of the train, and then the lights go out and they come on, and they get closer and closer. It's Halloween. They got all these people out. What if the people who wrote this movie decide, you know what? The Ghostface Killer doesn't always have to literally be the Ghostface Killer.
Exactly.
What if have
he's dressed as a clown,
or have Freddy Krueger?
Yeah.
If you could do the crossover, actually stab her in the stomach with the 4 knife blades or something.
Right.
Have something
have
like
them
that.
be a smart enough killer to assume another guys. To keep that surprise, why is he standing on ceremony so much?
It wouldn't be a Scream movie then.
Well, but see, that's where you have to do it. Like maybe he's wearing that underneath the other costume or something. But freshen it up a little bit. After 6 of these now, they've just got to start doing things that keep it guessing.
But to your point, David, and I'll let you get in here in a second, Mark, but
no,
you're right. It wouldn't have been the traditional branded Scream movie, but think about what the Scream movies are. They are a comment on horror franchises in a lot of ways. Imagine a Scream 7 where the killer assumes the identity of classic horror movie serial killers. You have a Jason, you have a Michael Myers. It's kind of like the mega franchise, like the multiverse of serial killers, but they're all going after the Scream gang. They just keep showing up in different guises, and it makes them harder to follow because they're all expecting Ghostface, as are we.
It's funny.
Yeah, there's what I'm with RJB, and wouldn't it be interesting? I know it would be giving hints to Halloween 2016. But in all honesty, I rather like Halloween 2016, how it explored how the trauma affected Laurie Strode. I love movies that explore this trauma of what happened to the final girl or group afterwards, right?
Sure.
So what if they have it to where one of the Ghostface killers does escape, and you've got just the Carpenter sisters, and in Scream 7, it's about copycats out there because they know the Ghostface is out there, and they go around killing Ghostface guys, which cops aren't gonna like, vigilante kind of stuff, right? But I mean, just stay with me. Where the Ghostface killer, and they get to the end, and you find out that the Ghostface killer stopped after what happened, and you know, he either died somewhere of an accident or natural causes. You know, I mean, I'm going to say
they still would be going around killing killers, right?
Right. But that's the thing is they would go around killing killers, so they become the killers because who knows?
But if
it's I Am Legend.
But to everybody's point here is we are now 6 movies in, and while this did a number of great things in the first and second act of the 3 acts that changed things up, did them so much better than anybody was expecting, you know, ended up making it, to your point, Mark, I think a much better movie than most of us probably expected. If they're going to do a 7th one now, and this was a big hit, so they probably will, they have to find other ways to do it. I don't think the audience is going to be disappointed if that Ghostface killer isn't always a Ghostface killer.
Right.
Be smart enough to say, sometimes I'm not going to be that way just to surprise you. Like maybe he's dressed as a painter in a scene. He's coming into pain and he kills the person.
With a ladder.
Exactly. It's a good point of the use of the ladder. Bring the ladder back. That's now a trope. But I mean, I just think it would be interesting to have somebody doing something that maybe he's a Ghostface killer because he just wants to kill and he's not connected to them. He's not from Woodsboro. And what do you do then? How do you get him then? Then it becomes a real detective story because you don't have the obvious list of Agatha Christie possibilities all lined up in a room like they're, you know, on a boat or something. It's like suddenly it's like, I don't know who the fuck this person is, but they're savage and they're looking for fame and social media, which a lot of this started to touch on. That might give it an even more resonance. And then what do those girls do? How do you find him then? And who is he?
Well, great questions. I like where you're going. I think these sequel ideas you're coming up with are probably going to be more interesting than whatever Scream 7 ends up being. But all right, we're going to close it down. We got 2 more comments from our good friend RJB. Ghostface Killer should meet the rapper Ghostface Killer. Maybe they're at a rap concert or something.
Go ninja, go killer, go killer.
It'll be like
go
My
killer,
Dinner with
go
Andre
killer.
scene.
Ooh, My Dinner with Ghostface. I like it.
Very
The key
funny.
to them getting away, though, I think, is they never get unmasked. They just leave the mask and leave that way. It could be a
there you
friend.
go.
It could be anyone.
Only Gail knows.
Because she's Ghostface. We're gonna get there eventually. If they get to Scream 8 and they bring it all full circle, one of the main characters is gonna be a killer. All right, we're gonna stop because we could talk about this until Scream 8 comes out.
True.
And I didn't
Next
skip
week.
over 7. I mean, yeah. All right. So thank you everybody for hanging out, for talking Scream 6. The more we talk about it, the more holes I see in this movie, the more holes that are in some of the victims who survived this movie. But I still love it. I am gonna go back and watch Scream 5 at some point and see if my estimation rises or sinks. Yeah, Daffy Duck. All right, so everybody, thank you. I am, as always, Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We have David Fowley of Keeping It Real. We got Mark the Movie Man Krawczyk, the DC shill not at Shazam, the Ghost the Face Man from the Spoiler Room, and we also have Jeff York of the Establishing Shot. Support all their work. Check out their links down below, as well as the works of the other Earth's Mightiest Critics who couldn't join us tonight. And join us back next week. We're going to be doing a live stream of The Mandalorian. It was usually due at 8 o'clock on Thursdays. And then we're going to be doing our Spotlight India film. I may be talking about this by myself. I don't know. But it's a film called Padmavat from 2018, I believe. So it looks very interesting, and we'll see how that goes. But until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much for watching this live stream. Be sure and like and subscribe and all that good business. And and drop us a comment. What's your favorite scary movie? Please don't say Scream 6. But till then, thanks. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
I'll go listen to